Welcome to Module 4 of the Environment Agency BIM e-learning. This module looks at how to use BIM during the delivery of a project stage and what needs to be done at the end of each stage. To start with, we'll explain the key roles and responsibilities for information management on a project. These are the Employer Information Manager and the Supplier Information Manager. We'll also look at the role that other project staff will play in delivering information in a stage. After that, we'll explain the process of managing information during the delivery of a stage. We'll look at the role of BS 1192, compliant file names in classifying data and information, and how to use the Common Data Environment. We'll explain the role of status codes for document management and how to review and comment on files in the CDE. Then we'll discuss the activities that need to be completed at the end of the stage. In particular, how to use the plain language questions to assist the gateway review, and the need to receive a completed COBie file at the end of each stage. Finally, we'll show you how to use the BIM Maturity Assessment tool to evaluate the adoption of BIM in your projects. Roles and responsibilities. We learned in Module 2 that when we've appointed a supplier, we have two common data environments, CDEs, active at one time. One of these is the Employer CDE, which is where data and information for use by the Environment Agency is stored. The other is the Supplier CDE, which is the environment that the supply chain staff use to work together to create the data and information that they'll transmit to the E-CDE. The process of transferring data and information between the CDEs is managed by the information managers. We have one from the employer, the Employer Information Manager, and one from the supplier, the Supplier Information Manager. The Employer Information Manager is responsible for the E-CDE, and the Supplier Information Manager for the S-CDE. These people are responsible for making sure that things are transferred between the CDEs and stored in their respective CDE with the correct metadata as profiled in the Information Delivery Plan. They are also responsible for making sure that the information in the CDEs is distributed to the appropriate project staff. Let's look at how this works for a typical file that a supplier will produce and issue to the EA. First, the supplier's team works on the file in the S-CDE. When the file is ready to be sent to the EA for review, the Supplier Information Manager transfers it to the E-CDE, making sure that it has correct metadata as set out on the IDP. Initially, it's sent only to the Employer Information Manager. They check that the file is suitable to be added to the E-CDE. In other words, that it's the right format, has the right metadata, and confirms that it's as specified in the IDP. If it is, then they accept the file into the E-CDE and make sure it's distributed to the EA project team for their review. Working the opposite way, the Supplier Information Manager is also responsible for transferring information out of the E-CDE and into the S-CDE. For example, once the EA staff have reviewed the file they've just received, the Supplier Information Manager needs to make sure they transmit that back to the S-CDE, so the supplier team can make changes. The information managers are gatekeepers for the respective CDEs. They make sure that anything entering their CDE has the metadata needed for the file to be useful and is in the correct open and native format. They also make sure that the members of the project teams on both sides are added to the CDEs as appropriate, and that files are distributed to the right people in the team as they're added. The Supplier Information Manager is one of the only members of the supply chain who should have access to the E-CDE. Any comment or feedback from the EA to the supply chain needs to be managed by the Supplier Information Manager. However, the Employer Information Manager should not have access to the Supplier CDE, as the purpose of this environment is for the suppliers to work on their information before publishing it to the EA. For this reason, no EA staff should be added to the Supplier CDE. The other types of role you'll see on a BIM workspace can be split down to three categories. The first is the Principal Designer, required under the CDM regulations. This person is the other member of the supply chain who should be added to the E-CDE. And if they're from the same organisation as the supplier delivering the work, then they also need to be added to the S-CDE. This is to allow them to fulfil their requirements under CDM, to review information to ensure that health and safety risks are managed correctly. Their other responsibility under BIM is to comply with the BIM process for reviewing and sharing information. The second category is members of the supplier team, other than the principal designer or the supplier information manager. These people should only have access to the supplier CDE, and again, their responsibility is to use the CDE in compliance with the BIM process. In practice, members of the supplier team can be added to the E-CDE to help the supplier information manager to fulfill their role, if the information manager delegates this responsibility to others. Finally, EA staff other than the employer information manager should only have access to the E-CDE. As with the other roles, they are responsible for using the CDE in compliance with BIM. Now we'll look at how to use BIM when delivering a stage of work. In the first e-learning module, you learned that metadata is used to provide data about data or information. It's the way we describe a piece of information, to classify it and make it easier to find and use in future. For files provided in a BIM common data environment, the main way we add metadata is through the use of a standard file naming convention. The file naming convention used on Environment Agency project has 13 fields, each of which contains a different piece of metadata. The first 7 fields are defined by the British standard BS 1192, whilst the last 6 are defined by the Environment Agency Employees Information Requirements. Every file uploaded to a common data environment needs to be named in accordance with the file naming convention. Using the IDP to profile your files makes this process easier, as it can be used to profile your files to generate the file name. If you're using the version of the IDP tool in A-Site, this can also be used to automatically upload files to the CDE with a compliant file name. Let's look at the file name in more detail to explain what each of these fields means. As we've just seen, the first 7 fields of the file name are defined by BS 1192. This means that they're required on any BIM project, regardless of the client. The first of these fields is the project reference. This is a unique number that applies to the project. For EA projects, this is usually the EA project number allocated from the finance team to record project costs. The second field is the author. This is the name of the organisation that produced the document. Here you can see the code is EA, for Environment Agency, which means we wrote the document. The volume and location codes are the next 2 fields. These codes define which volume and location the document relates to, using the codes set out in the project volume and location strategy. Type is the next field. This identifies what type of document it is, for example, whether it's a drawing, report, project program, etc. The 6th field contains the role, which tells you the type of discipline that produced the file. This is how you find files relating to a certain department, for example, project management, civil engineering, environmental aspects, and so on. And the final part of the BS 1192 file name is the file number, which is a unique project file reference. If you use the IDP to name all your files, then the file number will be automatically generated for you. Continuing to the next 6 fields defined by the employer's information requirements, we have the status of the document, which defines what the document is suitable to be used for. We'll explain statuses in the next section of this e-learning, but in brief, the status code tells you how much you can trust the document. It's similar to the difference between draft and final. The next code contains the revision number of the document. Then we have the deliverable reference, which tells you which of the standard IDP deliverable references the document belongs to. The next code contains the stage of the project at which the document was produced. Then we have the level of definition of the file. And finally, the last field is the plain text title of the document. When giving files a title, remember not to use any hyphens, as these are used in the BS 1192 file name to delineate between the fields. The purpose of the BIM file name is to help you find files in the workspace by filtering for the things you're looking for. The fields are defined by the IDP, and with the exception of the plain text title, either contain standard codes or ones you can manage through the IDP to suit your project. So, for example, if you wish to search for all the information that relates to a particular location, you can simply create a filter for that location in the CDE. Then it will show you all the information that relates to that location. Because the files containing that information have been saved with the location code in the file name. You can use this for any of the fields, and filter by multiple fields at once if you want. This makes it very easy to locate information in the CDE using the BS1192 file name. The author codes in the BS1192 file name refer specifically to the parties on either side of the contract. The author code indicates which party, in respect of the contract, takes responsibility and liability for the information. If the information has been produced by the organisation that's presenting it, so, for example, if the main supplier has produced a report and they share that with the Environment Agency, then the author code will correspond to that of the main supplier. If, on the other hand, the main supplier wishes to share information that's been produced by a subcontractor, then the author code still refers to the main supplier, not the subcontractor. This is because we have a contract with the main supplier, so they retain the liability for the accuracy of the information they issue to us. Similarly, if we have historical documents produced by a different organisation and we issue them to the supplier, then the author code should be EA, to show that in respect of the contract with the supplier, we have provided the information and take responsibility for it. When providing information in this way, it's important to make sure you select an appropriate status code to show the extent to which the information should be trusted. Let's look at these in more detail. Status codes are crucial in BIM, as they provide information about the levels of assurance that has been applied to data or information. In essence, they tell you how much the data or information can be trusted. The statuses are defined by BS1192. There are 4 groups of statuses for accepted information: work in progress, shared, published, and archived. Beneath that, there are status codes that define what the data or information is suitable to be used for. Let's look at these statuses in turn. The first status is work in progress. There's only one code for this, S0, which is used for any document with a work in progress status. Work in progress means, as the name implies, that the information or data is not complete. It's still being produced and is not ready to be distributed. This status is used for teams when they're producing information before it's ready to be shared with other organisations. As a result, information and data with a work in progress status can't be distributed to anyone in another organisation. For that, it needs to be shared or published. The next status is shared. This status is equivalent to draft. The author doesn't take full responsibility for the data or information being used, but they want to share it with others prior to releasing the final version. This is typically used when a supplier wants to share a draft version of something with the EA for information or for a client review. The 2 status codes used for shared in the EA allows for this and identify why an information supplier has issued the document. Information and data that is shared is unverified and unvalidated, which means that it can't be trusted and shouldn't be relied on. The published status is crucial, as this status indicates that the information or data is being presented by the supplier as a final version. This means that the author accepts responsibility for the information and that they are liable for any errors contained in it as per the terms set out in our contract with them. Published data and information has been verified and validated, which means that we can rely on it to make decisions. You can see there are more codes for published. This is because they follow the EA project stages and tell you the suitability of the data or information for different types of use. For example, a detailed design to be used for construction has to have an A4 status code to show that the author of the information warrants it for use as the final detailed design. Because published signifies that something is at a final state, by the end of a stage or contract, all the information and data within that stage or contract must be uploaded to the E-CDE with a published status and a published code that's appropriate to the project stage. Finally, the archive stage is used for information or data that is no longer relevant. For example, if a supplier published an outline design for a project and then the detailed design stage showed that the plan works aren't viable, you can change the outline design deliverables to archived to show that they are no longer relevant to the project. There are no defined codes for the archive status. Instead, the information retains its previous code to show how it was initially intended for use. File statuses are managed in the E-CDE by the Supplier Information Manager and the Employer Information Manager. As we've shown, the Supplier Information Manager is responsible for adding files to the E-CDE and adding its status, work in progress, shared or published. For shared and published files, the Employer Information Manager is then responsible for verifying that the file is suitable to be accepted into the E-CDE with the supplier's nominated status. They can either accept the file into the E-CDE as verified, or they can reject the file and notify the supplier what needs to be changed. Let's look at this in detail. The E-CDE follows a defined workflow for sharing or publishing files. To begin with, the file is added to the CDE with a BS1192 file name. At this point, it enters the workspace with a work in progress status. It's only visible to the person that uploaded it, and so needs to be distributed for anyone else to see it. At the work in progress status, the file can only be distributed to people in the same organisation as the person who uploaded it. To distribute the file to other organisations, the supplier of the file needs to change the status to shared or published. This can only happen once the Employer Information Manager has verified the information. So initially, the supplier will change the status to for sharing or for publishing. This distributes the file to the Employer Information Manager and notifies them that there's a request to change the status. They verify that the file has the correct metadata as set out on the MIDP and either change the status to shared or published, depending on what the supplier requested, or reject the file as not having the right metadata. Once the file was in the workspace with the correct shared or published code, the Employer Information Manager distributes it to members of the project team for them to review. The author code on a document indicates which organisation is responsible for the document. If we make any changes to the document, for example, by suggesting changes during the review process, then the EA is responsible for the changed version. There are two ways to deal with this. The first is to use the review functionality in A-Site to make comments or annotations to the supplier's document. This way, we're not changing the document, only adding comments over the top of it, which means that the author retains responsibility. For some types of documents, this isn't practical. For example, longer documents such as reports. If you wish to make changes directly to the document, then you need to download it and make your changes to the file. When you re-upload the changed document, you need to change the file name to make clear that the EA has authorized the new version. To do this, change the author code and give the document a new file number to show that it's a separate document. You could also consider updating the document title to make it clear that the new document contains the EA's comments. When the supplier makes changes to the original, they should then upload it over their original file as a new revision. That concludes our tour of the BIM processes you need to follow during stage delivery. Now we'll learn about what needs to happen at the end of the stage. At the end of a stage or supplier contract, you need to confirm that a number of things have been completed during delivery. First, confirm that all the information in the E-CDE that relates to the stage or contract has been delivered and has a published status. As we just saw, published documents are the final versions of the document. So if we don't have the published version in the E-CDE, then we haven't received the final version of the deliverable. Next, check that all the deliverables we've specified on the IDP have had data or information delivered against them. deliverables represent the specification or works information from the contract. So if there are deliverables that have not been issued, then it means that the supplier hasn't completed all the work that they have to provide under the contract. Then, see that all the items corresponding to the required deliverables have items profiled to them, and that the items have information published to them. Items represent the information that will be delivered by a stage or contract, so if this information isn't published, then it means we haven't received the final verified version. Finally, confirm that a COBie file for the stage has been published and verified. If you're using the IDP integrated into A-Site, then it'll tell you at a glance which deliverables have been published using the red, amber, green icons. When items or files have been uploaded to the CDE and accepted as published, then the IDP will flag these as green. You can see how that looks on this sample IDP. Similarly, when all the items that correspond to a deliverable have been uploaded and accepted as published, then the deliverable icon will show a green flag. You can also see some red icons on this IDP. This means that the item, and therefore the deliverable it corresponds with, hasn't been accepted in the CDE as published. This is telling you that the supplier hasn't yet delivered all the data and information that they told us they'd deliver under their contract. At the end of a contract or stage, all the items and deliverables that correspond with the contract or stage need to be green, to indicate that the E-CDE contains the information or data at a published status. Finally, confirm that the plain language questions, PLQs, for the stage have been answered. At the start of the stage, you will have populated the PLQs with the deliverables you expect to answer the appropriate questions for your project. The PLQs are displayed at the top of the IDP. You can find them by clicking the diamond icon in the stage heading. If you're using the IDP integrated into A-Site, then the PLQ answers will show you the status of the deliverables you've identified as answering the question. Green deliverables means that they've been delivered and published. Amber means they haven't, and red means that the deliverable is late. In this window, you can add notes relevant to the question and indicate whether the questions have been answered. Completing this process will help you review the stage gateway by identifying any data or information that hasn't been delivered and verified. In the last part of this e-learning module, we'll look at the BIM Maturity Assessment tool. The key aim of BIM is to make project delivery and handover more efficient. To measure this, the BIM Maturity Assessment tool, or BMAT, has been developed to measure how well BIM has been adopted on individual projects. The BMAT provides an assessment of BIM adoption at each stage. The outcome of the BMAT is a rating of BIM adoption, from which an efficiency score is produced. Project managers can use this efficiency score to calculate the cost avoided by adopting BIM, which can be included as part of project efficiency reporting. The BMAT needs to be completed at the end of each stage in order to provide a record of BIM adoption during a stage, and to calculate the cost savings resulting from BIM. The BMAT is an Excel spreadsheet which contains a number of yes/no questions, asking whether certain BIM activities have been carried out during the stage. There are different questions depending on the stage you're at. For example, it doesn't ask about what you've done during the construction stage if you're only at the business case stage. To complete the BMAT, add your project details at the top of the page and then answer the questions indicated on the BMAT. The assessment should be carried out by the EA project manager, senior user, and the lead supplier project manager at a minimum. At the assessment meeting, you can also include other roles as required. For example, the project executive and any key stakeholders in the project. When you've completed the BIM Maturity Assessment tool, it will provide you with several measures of BIM adoption. 2 of these measures represent the overall BIM maturity for the current project stage. The first is the current stage Level 2 BIM maturity. This provides a measure of BIM adoption relative to what is expected at the current project stage. The second is the weighted BIM efficiency score. This figure is used to calculate the BIM saving in the current stage. To calculate the stage BIM saving, you multiply the total stage value, including all supplier costs, EA staff costs, compensation, etc., by the weighted BIM efficiency score. For example, if your stage cost was £250,000 and you had a weighted BIM efficiency score of 1.6%, then your saving is £250,000 times 1.6%, which gives a £4,000 saving. The maximum weighted score for each stage is 2% of the total stage value. At each stage, you need to complete a new BMAT for that stage. So during a project, you will record several efficiency savings which add up to the total project saving. When you've completed the BMAT, add it to the IDP and publish the spreadsheet in the E-CDE. We have created a specific deliverable for completed BMAT submissions at deliverable reference E1800. You should also attach the completed BMAT to any efficiency claim you submit that includes the BIM saving. This completes Module 4 of the EA BIM e-learning. In this module, you've learned about the activities that need to be completed during stage delivery, and once you've completed a stage. You've learned about the key roles and responsibilities for information management. These are the roles of the Employer Information Manager and Supplier Information Manager, to oversee the transfer and verification of information and the responsibility that other project staff have to follow BIM information management processes when delivering their work. Then you learned about what needs to happen during the delivery of a project stage. You saw how BS1192 file names are crucial for recording the metadata we use to classify information and the role of the common data environment to facilitate the transfer of information and data. You learned about the status codes used in BIM to convey the suitability of data and information for different kinds of use. And you learned how to review information in the E-CDE by amending the author code if you make changes to information created by another organisation. At the end of a stage, you learned about the checks that need to be carried out to assure the delivery of all the information and data required to pass the gateway. You learned about answering the plain language questions and that you need to receive a verified COBie file to complete the stage. Finally, you learned how to use the BIM Maturity Assessment tool to evaluate the adoption of BIM in your projects and how to calculate the cost saving during a stage that results from using BIM to deliver the project. There will now be a short test on what you've learned in this module. To pass, you need to score at least 70% overall. Good luck!